This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Fears of a broader regional war in the Middle East are growing after Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran, where he was visiting for the inauguration of Iran's new president. Iran and Hamas both accused Israel of killing Haniyeh. In a statement, Hamas's military wing said his assassination was a, quote, significant and dangerous event that shifts the battle to new dimensions and will have major repercussions across the entire region, unquote. The killing of Haniyeh came less than 24 hours after Israel claimed it had assassinated Fuad Shukr, a senior Hezbollah commander in Beirut, Lebanon. Hezbollah confirmed Shukr had been in the building at the time, but the group has not confirmed his fate. Israel had accused Shukr of being involved in Saturday's rocket attack that killed 12 Druze children in the occupied Golan Heights. Hezbollah has denied involvement. The Lebanese Health Ministry said Israel's strike in Beirut on Tuesday killed 3 civilians, including a woman, a girl, and a boy, and wounded 74 others. While Israel quickly confirmed its role in the Beirut attack, the Israeli government has not yet made any official comment on its involvement in the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. However, the Israeli government press office did post a photo of Haniyeh to Facebook with the word eliminated over his head. The office later took down the photo. Speaking in Ramallah, longtime Palestinian politician Dr. Mustafa Barghouti warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to spark a broader war.
The Israeli crime of assassinating Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, will not break the Palestinian resistance or the Palestinian people's determination to achieve our freedom. But fascists are now dominating the Israeli government, and they are trying to drag the whole region into a total explosion. Netanyahu is a war criminal, and he is trying even to drag the United States itself into a confrontation with Iran and with the whole region.
There are protests in a number of cities in the West Bank right now, and a general strike called. A funeral for Ismail Haniyeh will be held in Tehran on Thursday. He'll be buried then in Qatar on Friday. Haniyeh had served as Hamas's top political leader since 2017 and briefly served as Palestine's prime minister after Hamas won elections that the U.S. supported in 2006. Haniyeh was born in the Shati refugee camp near Gaza City. Over the past 10 months, Israel's killed numerous members of his family, including 3 of his sons, at least 2 of his grandchildren, his sister and her family. Haniyeh had played a central role in the ceasefire hostage negotiations. Earlier today, Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, wrote on X, quote, "How can mediation succeed when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side? Peace needs serious partners and a global stance against the disregard for human life," he said. We're joined now by 3 guests. Karim Makdisi is in Beirut, Lebanon. He's a professor of international politics at the American University of Beirut, co-host of the Makdisi Street podcast. In Tel Aviv, Israel, Gideon Levy is an award-winning Israeli author and journalist, columnist for the newspaper Haaretz, and a member of the Haaretz editorial board. And in Boston, we're joined by Rami Kori, Palestinian American journalist, a senior public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Arab Center, Washington. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Karim Makdisi, want to start with you in Beirut. You have this reported assassination of a leading Hezbollah commander that takes place in your city, the capital of Lebanon, Beirut, followed by, within 24 hours, the assassination of Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Can you talk about the significance of this?
Yes, thank you, Amy. It's obviously extremely significant, and people here are extremely worried about, this, what everybody's been talking about, which is this escalation what seems to be this inexorable escalation towards a much bigger regional war. And I think it's fairly clear that there are some on the Israeli side, Netanyahu and his fundamentalist, kind of religious fundamentalist government that's there, that really are the only people that have this major interest to continue this kind of war rather than to stop it. And the way to stop all of this war is to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, to stop the genocide, and to ensure that there could be some kind of at least stability in the region. Only one player, only one side refuses that, and that's Netanyahu and his government.
And Karim Makdisi, for decades now, Israel has pursued this policy of assassinating leaders of the Palestinian resistance or other opponents to Israeli policy, yet it has had no impact on changing the fundamental issue still of the rights of the Palestinian people. What is your sense of how this policy of assassinations, what it's done to any possibilities of further peace talks?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, it's very clear that these assassinations have been successful. I mean, in operational terms, these are very, very important people. But on the kind of larger level, this is a political momentum. There is a people that wants its liberation, that wants its self-determination, and in Palestine anyway, and that will continue to do so even as various top leaders are assassinated. When one is assassinated, we've seen over the many decades where Israeli assassinations of kind of top-level Palestinian leaders, they're replaced. And more so, and they become more and more effective over time. And that's because they represent a people that wants its liberation, that wants its self-determination. And in the case of Lebanon, it's a similar thing. There's an occupation. There's been a very long history of Israeli aggression and attacks and invasions and occupations in Lebanon. And Hezbollah and other resistance forces were created as a result of all these occupations and invasions. So assassinating is extremely harmful for sure on operational levels. But when it comes to the larger struggles, it's not going to stop this momentum towards a kind of continuing the struggle against Israel, for sure.
I'd like to bring in Gideon Levy, the Israeli journalist, if you could comment on the current situation, these latest assassinations by Israel.
Yes, domestically, I mean, Israelis like this kind of operations, and therefore those operations are taking place. Here we are again, the James Bonds of the Middle East, knowing the color of the underwears of each terrorist in Tehran or in Damascus. But by the end of the day, I think most of the Israelis understand, I hope they do understand, that this leads us nowhere. Tonight, after those two assassinations, it's very clear that the chances for a ceasefire and for a deal and for saving the hostages is almost finished. Nobody is going to negotiate with Israel when Israel is killing, murdering the negotiators. It's the most basic thing. And above all, history had to teach us by now that all the assassination that Israel committed, and I stress it, all of them, did not contribute anything, neither to the security of Israel, nor to any kind of chances for peace. We had one after the other assassinating, the most horrible leaders. They always told us so much blood on their hands. And then came the replacement with much more blood on his hands.
Gideon Levy, do you agree with Dr. Mustafa Barghouti in Ramallah that Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is simply trying to continue and expand the war because when it ends, he's out?
Absolutely, but I give him more credit than this. I think it's not his only consideration. No doubt that this is a major consideration because the facts on the ground prove it. He, until now, did anything possible to sabotage any kind of chance for a ceasefire. But by the end of the day, knowing Netanyahu for many years, this man never believed in any kind of deals with the Arabs. He doesn't believe in any kind of negotiation and any kind of peace with them, and even not with Hamas over a ceasefire and releasing hostages. So by the end of the day, it's a combination of ideology, quite a dangerous and dark one, and personal motivation, sure.
I'd like to bring in Rami Kori, who's in Boston, a Palestinian journalist. The attack that occurred, which Israel claims was done by Hezbollah on the Golan Heights, on the Druze children that were killed there, very little attention is focused on the Golan Heights. Could you talk about the relationship there between the population on the Golan Heights and the Israeli authorities? Because Netanyahu and others who went there did not exactly receive a warm welcome from those who they claimed they were trying to defend.
Well, nobody who occupies another people is ever going to get a warm welcome anywhere. The Druze are a minority that are originated in the mountains of Lebanon. And you find Druze communities in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine. The Druze on the Golan Heights are Syrian citizens. When Israel occupied the Golan in '67 and annexed it in, I think, 1981, a few Druze took Israeli citizenship. Many Druze left, went back into Syria, unoccupied Syria, and many stayed there, but did not take Israeli citizenship. So it's a mixed combination. The Druze in Israel have been assimilated pretty much into Israel since 1948, and they serve in the border police and the things like that, the armed forces sometimes. So it's a community that is very much part of the Arab world, but has a different religion and ethnicity in a way. But this is typical of the Arab region, a very pluralistic region, which, of course, Zionism in 1917 convinced the British to create a super ethnic Jewish super nationalist apartheid state, which has now become a zombie killing machine all over the region, and the world doesn't quite know what to do with it. The Druze are simply the latest victims of this monster that has been unleashed. And really the lessons, I think, of the last few days, but certainly the last 9 months and more, if you look at Gaza, the West Bank, the whole nature of Israel, the process of Zionism, has to now be contained and defined. And this has to be done by the world, like the world created Israel in the 1947 UN General Assembly resolution. Only the world can step in and contain and define Zionism, allowing the Palestinians to have their right to self-determination, which even now the American leadership speaks of self-determination, 2 states. They say these things, but they keep giving Israel the arms. So this is a very complex balance between global support for Israel and giving Israel carte blanche to destroy international law, destroy UN resolutions, all the norms of civilization. This has been going on for years and years, and it's getting much worse. And this week is an example of 2 more dimensions of this.
As Netanyahu spoke in the Golan Heights, a crowd of Druze protesters gathered chanting, "Bibi is a murderer," holding up signs calling the Israeli leader a war criminal.
He is an unwelcome person in our place. He is a liar and corrupt. He is coming to use the bodies of our children to be on TV. We will not allow this to happen.
Gideon Levy, you were there on Sunday. If you can further elaborate on what Rami is saying, talk about how people felt at the time. Now, Hezbollah is saying they think it's a anti-missile projectile of Israel that came down on the soccer field, on the children, and killed 12 people. But explain what people are saying, the Druze population on the ground.
You see, I've been there, Amy, really few hours after it happened, and the main sentiment was of shock. People were really shocked. It's a small village, and everyone is attached to everyone, and they all felt that it was their own children being killed. Not only this, they all rushed to the football field, to the soccer field, and they all saw the bodies which couldn't be identified. So the whole village was in turmoil when I was there. Few young people that I talked with asked for revenge, but say that they don't want innocent people to be killed. Others were courageous enough to say, don't take revenge. It will not help us. It will not return our children to us. And please don't do anything, which is very rare to hear in Israel, in Jewish Israel. Usually after attacks over Jewish Israel, the overall sentiment is of taking revenge. In Majd al-Shams, it was quite divided. Very impressive people, I must say. The young people are very impressive. Part of them went through an Israelization process. They don't serve in the army like the other Jews in Israel, but I could feel, I wasn't there for a few years, I could feel that the young generation is getting much more Israeli than their parents, and they were also asking for more and more Israeli citizenship because they realize that that's their key for good life.
I want to ask Karim Makdisi in Beirut. So Israel did then attack a building in Beirut. If you can give us the details of what happened and talk about the Hezbollah commander who they say they killed, though we're just reporting that. We don't actually know. It is been said that he was in that building and many people were killed there.
Yes, this was, last night in the evening when people were having dinner or people were outside in the streets and just moving around, and there were some drone attacks by the Israelis. They hit. It's an extremely, Beirut is a very, very dense city. In the suburb, the Dahi, there were the suburbs of Beirut where these guys were located, is an exceptionally kind of dense civilian population. So these missiles or these drones hit this residential building. And if you see pictures of it, you see that it's been mostly destroyed. So there's, I think last I checked, there were maybe between 70 and 80 that were wounded. There have been 4 that are dead, including 2 children that they took from the rubble, Hassan and Amira Fadlallah, who were found, embracing each other under the rubble and had died in this case. And this has created an incredibly difficult moment for people there and for people in Beirut and across Lebanon. And at the other hand, it's also something which is very familiar. The Israelis have been attacking Beirut, have been attacking Lebanon for decades. I mean, since before I was born. There's just been non-stop invasions, attacks. So these kinds of things are not new in the kind of bloodlust in the history of Israeli attacks in Lebanon. But what is different now is the response. That I would say that since the 2006 war, there has been a kind of deterrence that had been established where prior to that, if the Israelis decided they want to take out a building, they want to kill people, they want to do things, they would do this with total impunity, with, of course, American support and total impunity, and nothing really could be done. Since 2006 war, and increasingly, and particularly, as Hezbollah became more and more powerful and, recruited more people and trained more people, became more professional, much better equipment, etc., the deterrence that was established means at the moment that if the Israelis, this is according to Hezbollah and according to Hassan Nasrallah, if the Israelis attack Beirut, there will have to be some kind of response. I just want to make one point from, that was previously discussed. The idea of Majd al-Shams in the Golan, I want to reiterate that this was not Israel, and this was occupied Syrian territory. The Druze are there. All the Druze that were killed did not have Israeli citizenship, as far as I know. So the Israeli, kind of claimed to say they wanted self-defense or use international law. All of this was total mumbo-jumbo. It's a totally illegal and immoral attack. And we know for sure that Netanyahu, as you said in the clip before this, that they were basically hounded out when they came to the funeral. When they came to check in, they were told to leave and told not to take any kind of revenge. We know that Netanyahu and his government do not care about children. So this kind of fake tears about the children, the Druze children in Majd al-Shams, which is an incredible tragedy, is total nonsense. This was an excuse. It's extremely important to remember that Netanyahu was in the U.S. There was that grotesque event at the Congress where people were giving him standing ovations in this talk, in which he was doing inside the U.S. Congress, which was broadcast across the world, which really weakens U.S. standing and shows the kind of relationship between Netanyahu and the Israelis and the Americans. This is something which Hezbollah, which people in Lebanon, which people in the region all observe very carefully, the way in which Netanyahu was in America, was given these standing ovations, was effectively, as far as people are concerned here, were given the green light to attack not just Lebanon, but also Iraq and Iran. Surely the Americans knew about this. So this idea of a Biden administration, which has been very pro-genocide as far as the vast majority of the world, and certainly in this region are concerned, has been complicit in the genocide against Palestinians. They have been complicit in protecting the Israelis at all costs, at the international level, at every possible corner, for prosecution against the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, all of these, the UN Security Council, all of the avenues the U.S. has been helping Israel and providing weapons at a daily basis, without which the Israelis simply could not prosecute any of these kinds of wars. So it's really important to try to understand what is the U.S. role. The U.S. could stop this in an instant. The U.S. could have forced Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire. All this business of Anthony Blinken and others who are extremely complicit in the genocide in Palestine, where they came and the American mediators were briefing, even in Lebanon, just before the attack, they were briefing that Beirut, the Israelis won't attack Beirut. It'll be a kind of symbolic attack. So clearly, there's kind of briefings were part of a misinformation campaign that was being launched to try to take people by surprise. The U.S. can stop this. The U.S. has the tools to do so, to compel Netanyahu. And the way to do this is to do an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, to stop the genocide, and to try to stop this movement, this inexorable movement to a regional war. And I think this is what people here are extremely concerned about. We've lived through wars. We've grown up in these wars. This is the first time the Israelis are experiencing these kinds of attacks and this kind of displacement. And this will get much worse for the Israelis as well. So let us hope that the Americans are able to rein back Netanyahu rather than give him these standing ovations to a war criminal, to somebody who is presiding over an apartheid, genocidal state, and somebody who has a personal interest, as your guests are saying, a personal interest to prolong the war, to drag America in at a time when President Biden is both extremely supportive and at the same time he seems to have lost the rein. I mean, the American government now seems to be missing in action. And this is extremely dangerous, and Netanyahu is trying to take advantage of this.
I wanted to follow up on that, Karim. You mentioned the Biden administration's role right now. The Biden administration's envoys, Amos Hawkin, has visited Beirut several times. Could you explain who he is and what his role has been in the negotiations between Israel and Lebanon?
Yeah, sure. So Amos Hawkin, in fact, is an Israeli citizen. He's an Israeli American, very close to Biden, and his advisor on energy issues and other kinds of issues. And he was, he mediated between Lebanon and various Lebanese and the Israelis when it came to the maritime boundary. There was an agreement that was signed last year. And that was fairly successful, frankly. And he's one of these people that kind of operates behind the scenes and doesn't make big declarations, which is good for a mediator. But he is an Israeli. So the idea was that he was supposed to be continuing his mediation to try to, very importantly, over the past several months, one of the main aims to try to de-escalate. I mean, they did not want a regional war. The U.S. at least had, keep proclaiming it does not want the expansion of the war. The U.S. very much supports the genocide in Gaza, but it's against having a kind of larger regional war. Hawkin was this emissary, and the messages came through, let's de-escalate, let's try to pull back to the kind of UN resolutions, 1701, which kind of ended the war in 2006. Have Hezbollah kind of, at least its armed presence, at least the visible presence kind of be withdrawn from there, and the Israelis will stop the overflights, this kind of thing. But the central part, which is simply not workable, was that he was trying to de-link Lebanon, or let's say the Israeli northern front, Lebanon southern front, with Gaza. So the idea was to say, let's de-escalate here while whatever goes on in Gaza is separate. That is not workable. It's something which Hezbollah has said from October 8th, that this is not acceptable, that the front will continue to be open until a permanent, what's called the permanent ceasefire is reached in Gaza and the genocide ends. Until that moment, there will not be an end to the war here. The U.S. government knows this very well. So the emissary, Hochstein, as I said, who is an Israeli, has a lot of contacts here, is fairly well regarded in general, but at the same time, it's very clear that his mission was to try to de-link Lebanon from Gaza, and that's something that's impossible, both in terms of the historical context, in terms of the political context, and the fact that Hezbollah is not in that position where it will just kind of go away and not achieve its own political objectives for nothing. So the idea of a deterrence that happened after 2006 is very much here. The idea that the Israelis will be able to dictate the settlement across the border between the Lebanese and the Israelis is absolutely not workable. The idea that Hezbollah will somehow disappear or disarm or, all this stuff is totally unimaginable outside of a ceasefire in Gaza and outside of a larger kind of just settlement where the Palestinians receive their liberation and their self-determination. The rest is not going to happen. And the worry, of course, if I can add one more point, is that there's this larger axis, what's called this axis of resistance, which Hezbollah in Lebanon is at the center of it, along with Iran, along with the Houthis in Yemen, and in Iraq and in Syria. There are all these different forces that have been kind of operating as a support front for Hamas and for Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And so you've got this, for the first time, this larger regional dimension, which is engaged militarily, as you know, from Yemen to Lebanon. This now is at a balance. The question is, if the Israelis do what I think Netanyahu wants to do, which is to draw Lebanon into a much larger war, draw Hezbollah into a much larger war, that would draw the Iranians in, which is why they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, in full view, and this is something clearly to try to provoke an Iranian response, which they've already said they're going to have to respond. Lebanon, Hezbollah, there has to be a response. Netanyahu and his religious fundamentalists in government would like such a response to draw the United States in. Everybody can see this, and everybody can see that this is heading towards a regional war. And this is why I find it, and many people here find it incredible, that the U.S. administration, that the U.S. government is unable to stop the slide to war. So with or without a mediator in Lebanon, the mediation is done behind the scenes, but it is entirely useless and won't have any teeth absent a ceasefire in Gaza. This is the way it is.
I'd like to bring in, if I can, Gideon Levy on this whole issue of the larger significance of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and also in Iran. The attack occurred in Iran. What could potentially be the Iranian response?
Nobody can tell, but the signs are very, very worrying. It was an irresponsible act by Israel, no doubt, because Israel cannot guarantee what will be the Iranian reaction. And this time it involves Iran. Don't forget that Iran feels responsible for Haniyeh because he was a frequent guest in Tehran and he was quite appreciated there. And as such, killing him on Iranian soil has a special meaning for Iran if Iran will not react, which I totally don't believe, but if they will not react, their position as heading this whole group of countries and organizations fighting for Palestine will totally be questioned and doubted, because here you are, until now you only used your proxies, but now when there is an attack on your own soil, you keep passive. I can't believe this will happen. And obviously, anyone who goes for such an operation and does not take into account the risks, and the risks are enormous, is irresponsible. And therefore, those hours will be very crucial, maybe the coming days. But I cannot see that this will end up in any good way. The only question is, how big will the catastrophe be?
We just have 1 minute. We're ending with Rami Kori, Palestinian American journalist, joining us from Boston. The significance of Ismail Haniyeh, his assassination, and what you feel, being in Boston yourself, should be response of the Biden administration? Already, Antony Blinken has said we had no foreknowledge of this. Netanyahu had just left the United States after going to the U.S. Congress joint session speech. He went down and met with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago, came back and led the assassination, at least they claim, of the commander, Hezbollah leader in Beirut, and now Ismail Haniyeh. His meaning to Palestinians.
Ismail Haniyeh's meaning is that he has been a high official in Hamas really since 2006, when Hamas won the democratic elections in Palestine, which the U.S., by the way, was happy to help take place. But when Hamas won, the U.S. and Israel immediately sanctioned the Palestinians. So Haniyeh's importance is he's been there a long time, near or at the top of Hamas's political leadership. The military leadership is a separate unit, but they obviously coordinate here and there. He is important also because he has been sort of on the pragmatic side of the political leadership. He wrote to President Bush in 2006, right after he became prime minister of Palestine, and at one point unified Palestine with Fatah and Hamas together in the government. And he said to Bush, look, you're a big democracy. We're a democratic country with our elections. We should be talking to each other. And he said that Hamas supports a long-term truce with Israel. In other words, ending the state of armed conflict, trying to negotiate a permanent resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian or the Arabist-Zionist confrontation that's gone on for 100 years now. So he represents that side of Hamas, and Hamas has made 6 or 7 such overtures in the last 15 years, all of which have been ignored by Israel and the United States. So the killing Haniyeh really is a sign from the Israelis that they're not interested in negotiating the ceasefire, the hostage release, prisoner exchanges. They just want to assert Zionist Jewish supremacy in all of Palestine and control the powers around the region. This is the great challenge now to the world, to rein in Israel, to create a situation where people put some meat onto the bones of the Americans and the Europeans and everybody talking about a two-state solution, self-determination. Those words are meaningless unless they have some muscle behind them, and this remains missing. Kamala Harris must be in the most uncomfortable position in the world, because she has tried with verbal messages to express a more reasonable approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to rein in the Israeli excesses militarily and the genocide, and to humanize the Palestinians and their suffering, saying this has to end, and talking of self-determination and 2 states. But she can't do any of that as vice president. She has to wait till she's nominated after August 20, and when she is then the official candidate of the Democratic Party, if she's serious, she then will have an opportunity to show if she is going to actually do something. And this is something that's critical because it may cost her the election. There are large numbers, millions of Americans, progressive Americans, Arab Muslim Americans, Jewish progressive Americans, all kinds of people, labor unions who want the U.S. support for the Israeli genocide to stop.
Rami, we're going to have to leave it there, but of course we're going to continue to cover this issue in our next segment, talk about Kamala Harris. Rami Kori, Palestinian American journalist, senior public policy fellow at American University of Beirut, non-resident senior fellow at Arab Center, Washington. Karim Makdisi, speaking to us from Beirut, a professor at the American University of Beirut. And Gideon Levy, Israeli journalist and Haaretz columnist, speaking to us from Tel Aviv. Thank you all so much.